afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are joining us in another time zone or watching the webinar replay. And welcome to another Plan Tracker NDIS Cuppa Questions. Joining me here once again this week is Elisa James, our founder and managing director. Elisa, welcome.
Thanks, Mel. And you just did that so nicely after just inhaling a piece of lemon and starting to burst into coughs. So I've been warned if she suddenly just disappears, it's because she's in a coughing fit. I'm excited about today, Mel. Lots of things happening. PPE changes again. So Minister Robert seems to be announcing changes almost weekly at the moment. So lots to catch up on.
There certainly is, and I've also noticed a trend with those announcements being very late on a Friday afternoon, so we all have to wait till Monday to ask our questions. So without further ado, Lisa, I think we might jump in today, and thank you for excusing me if I do just mute myself and look like I'm coughing. It's because I did inhale some lemon from my water, so I apologise there. But let's pop out.
Dangerous water there, Mel.
It is. I was trying to be healthy, but you know. It's always these things. So I'm just going to pop our slides up on the screen for today's session and we'll get started for everyone. So Lisa, do you just want to confirm for me that you can see those slides on your side?
I can. I'm just going to move them over here. Lovely.
Fantastic. While you're moving them, I think we might jump into our hot topic of the day. And just before I ask you our very first question for this session, I want to remind everyone that if you have questions as you're going along, whether you've joined us before or you haven't, we have the lovely Justine from the Plan Tracker team joining us in the chat box today. So you can use our chat functionality or our Q&A to ask questions as we go along. Justine will also be sharing some resource links in there that will, of course, be available on the webinar replay page as well if you don't want to go clicking away during the session and you just want to sit back and enjoy a cuppa, that's what we're here for, and we'd love for you to do that. So Elisa, let's jump in. PPE, so personal protective equipment is what PPE stands for. We had some updates, I think 2 weeks ago now, that we went through with regards to participants being able to claim, but what's the big announcement from the Minister last week?
Okay, so maybe just a quick recap back. The original announcement was that PPE would be covered under your plan, if you've got a plan, for both providers and also for the participants. So if somebody comes into your home and you need to wear, and you're the participant and you need to wear or have PPE, you can cover the cost of that. But also if the support worker for example, needs to have PPE, they can charge you for that. Now, the slight tweak to this, and actually it's a really smart tweak, is that providers can now claim PPE directly, only registered providers, because in order to claim directly, you need to be a registered provider. So this is more likely to impact people who are using support services from some of the larger disability organisations. But basically it means that rather than putting the cost of the worker's PPE onto your invoice, they can now claim directly from the NDIS portal themselves by invoicing the NDIS. If you're a provider and you're in that situation and you're registered, what that means is that you can create an invoice. Rather than invoicing the participant, you simply invoice the NDIA, include a row for each participant with the details of what it is you're claiming, and there's information. I think Justine's going to pop the links up on there. But basically you can claim an item for each, or not an item, but a row for each participant, and it's based on the number of hours that you have delivered face-to-face. So there are a couple of rules around it, and I think it's $1.70. Am I right? $1.70?
I'm pretty sure you are.
Pretty sure I'm right. $1.70 per hour. So if you've provided 10 hours of care, see how I'm going with easy maths this week, then that would be a whole bunch of money, $17. There you go.
I thought you were going to leave us hanging there. So.
Oh, I was just letting everybody else have a go first at home, playing along. There you go. So that's really the big change for PPE.
Lovely. Now, under the original change that we had, a participant could reclaim the costs for PPE under their NDIS funding. Is that still possible? And I'm just going to close this window that's making my light go everywhere.
For sure. It is. And there are 3 different codes for claiming PPE. Having said that, I can only think of 2 of them right now. One is the one where you as a participant have purchased PPE for yourself to use, and that's claimed from your consumables budget. And the other is where you are being charged for PPE for the use of a support worker. So generally they will bring it along, but they're going to charge you for the cost of that PPE. And that's because most PPE being used at the moment is disposable, which is a lot safer at this point. Sorry, environment and all the teenagers out there. We certainly hear about it regularly at our house. But it does mean that if you are receiving an invoice from your provider, probably unregistered provider, now with this current change that the Minister brought through on Friday afternoon, then you can cover the cost. We can claim the cost of that if you're plan managed or you're self-managing from your funding. And actually for providers, we would claim it out of that O1 assistance with daily life or daily living budget.
Fantastic. And we did have a question. And Karen, thank you for asking this. I'm just going to make it a bit broader for our audience here, as Justine's already answered you directly. What can I do if a provider, so we'll say in this example, a registered provider, is still charging me for PPE after these changes?
So look, there's a couple of things you could do. You could either think, okay, it's not a huge amount, it probably won't impact the end result of my budget, knowing that at the moment the agency has made it easier to request an early review. And on that, if you are within 100 days of the end date of your plan, requesting that review to be brought forward for whatever reason and whatever mechanism at the back end there works a whole lot, is a whole lot easier to do. So if you are within that kind of 100-day end date, you don't necessarily have to wait. You can contact and call. And of course, even at an earlier date, if there's change of circumstances, you can do that too. It's just a little bit more involved. Or you could let your provider know that there has been a change. It's pretty new information, and most providers, given it was Friday afternoon, may not have kept up. So there's information available on the NDIS website, or get them to call the NDIA directly. And they're, we've certainly found them pretty helpful today, just around clarifying how that happens.
We definitely did. And it is important to note as well that the Minister's announcement that came out on Friday actually said providers in New South Wales and Victoria especially would be contacted this week as to how the claiming process works. So some businesses may not have pivoted yet in response to these changes. So it may just be coming down to what we always say, Lisa, is communication is key, and have a conversation with your provider.
Exactly,
of course,
right.
If you're plan managing with us and you've got questions, feel free to reach out to the Plan Tracker team. The other thing that I just wanted to recap on is, what about hand sanitizer? So we've had this question before and it's not in the notes. So I'm sorry.
That's not fair, Mel. They give me hint sheet notes. It helps.
Well, for everyone who's read our PPE update that we did release last Friday, shortly before this announcement came out, so we will be updating that, hand sanitizer is still not included as a PPE expense claimable under the NDIS, so your provider can't claim that and you can't claim it under your plan. So that's the agency guidance at the moment. And you also can't claim for face masks, I believe, if it's just accessing the community without support. So they're considered general living expenses rather than assistance with daily living requirements under your support plan. So without further ado, Lisa, I've got another topic I want to talk to you about that we get lots of questions. Now, this one's equally interesting for both our providers who are listening or watching the replay, as well as for participants when you have questions about, why hasn't my provider been paid yet? So getting paid faster, it's what everyone is thinking about. It's, I need cash flow. If I'm a bigger business, if I'm an independent sole trader, then this is my sole income, then having a good cash flow is really important to sustaining my life and my family as well. So Elisa has kindly agreed to go through some tips, tricks and essentials for making sure that you get it through on the first go. And you've got all of that essential information that your potentially plan manager needs to process on behalf of the participant. So, and equally, if your participant is self-managing, this information is generally required on their invoice as well, or on their receipt, so that they have that information. So, Elisa, we might go from a perspective as our plan manager hat we'll wear here. Who should the invoice be addressed to?
All right. So if you are a provider, then you've probably already thought about how you're going to invoice, if you haven't already. Or you've probably been invoicing. There's some things you can do to help make that process work much better. And it also means that you basically get paid faster, which is what everybody's after, and less processing, less back and forward fixing things up. So here are some hints and tips on how to make sure your invoice gets processed on the first go, and therefore you get paid faster. The first thing would be to make sure you address your invoice, raise your invoice to the participant. So it must have the participant's name on there. So you're not invoicing the plan manager, you're not invoicing the NDIA, you're invoicing the participant. So raise the invoice to them. It can be helpful to have their NDIA number on there, depending on who you're plan managing with. They may or may not request that from you. The second thing is having your contact details as a provider. So if there's an issue or there's a question, it's really tricky if there's no contact phone number on there. So a contact phone number, and most importantly, an email address. Plan Tracker, and I'm sure many other plan managers, want to send you a remittance advice so that we can say, hey, we've just paid you for all of these invoices. Having your email address on the invoice just makes that nice and simple. Probably the biggest thing that that our team find that slows things down is missing bank details. I can't tell you how many bank details we have to chase up every day, and it's surprising because you would think surely people would want to give their bank details. Bank details are pretty important. It's not something you can just ring a plan manager and say, "Hey, I've changed my bank details." If you're going to do that, they're going to email you with the email address on record and confirm that that's actually the case. Obviously, that's a space that, we're not just going to take a phone call on bank detail
Why is
changes.
that, Elisa? Why do we not just take a phone call?
Because if somebody was feeling particularly inventive, they could simply call and request change of bank details over the phone and change them to their own. Unless there's those double checks and those good kind of thorough processes in place, we could mistakenly pay the wrong person, and the original provider would never know.
So we're protecting the participant and the provider as well in this situation.
Absolutely, that's right. So there's always double checks around any bank detail changes. The best way though is to have your bank details on the invoice. That makes it a whole lot easier. And just on that, if you do change your bank details, make sure that you send an extra email to alert people, just to so that also gets changed over nicely and easily. When it comes to what do you put on your invoice, the basic information that you need is the date of the service. So let's use a real life example. Let's say it's support work. Keep it simple, support work at home. So we would be expecting to see the dates of service. So for example, if you did 4 hours support work on, I'm going to get back, what's today? Tuesday the 25th. So you might put 25th of the 8th, and then support work at home. Keep it nice and simple. No need to write an essay. We don't need to know what you did. Just a general description of what it was that you were providing. Number of hours, 4 times price, 50. And the total for that one, 200. Very simple. So I'm ignoring GST there for a moment. I'm going to mention that in a second. But yeah, simple, straightforward. Date of service, description, units, number of units or hours, and the price per unit. That will make things a lot easier. I mentioned GST a moment ago. There are some, if you're a larger organisation, you'd be already registered potentially or possibly for GST. Under the NDIS, GST is generally not chargeable on supports that are being paid for with NDIS funding, which kind of makes sense, right? Government money paying government money, doesn't make a lot of sense to charge GST on those services. However, if you're a provider, you need to seek your own advice on that. The ATO has some excellent information. So if you look up on the ATO website, NDIS and GST, you'll find the information there. But the general guidelines are, if you are a GST registered provider or business, then you need to have a service agreement in place acknowledging that GST is not payable on that particular service that you're delivering in order to not charge GST. So So we don't bore everybody about GST, I'm going to park that one there. Feel free to check it out or talk to your own accountant on that one.
Fantastic.
And then the final thing, just to make it super quick, is when you send your invoice, send it as a PDF attachment. Nice and simple. It's much easier. Most plan managers, us included, use invoice readers to make the process of getting those hundreds and thousands of invoices into our systems for processing. And so those invoice readers struggle with just simply a link. So if you send an invoice that's simply a link that needs clicking on to open an invoice, it can get tricky. We don't want your invoices getting stuck. So attaching it as a PDF, and you'll find your invoicing system usually has a little checkbox somewhere that says, also send as an attachment PDF. That's going to make it a whole lot easier.
Fantastic. And we do have a hot tip. If you're not using an invoicing system and you're manually generating your invoices, super important to make sure that you give each individual invoice a unique invoice number. So if you've used number one before, you can't go and use number one again the next week. It does happen, surprising to some providers, I'm sure. It definitely does happen. And having those conversations just slows down you getting paid fast, which is really the ultimate outcome that we want for everyone. And I'm sure that's what you each want in your own individual businesses and circumstances. So these are just some nice tips and tricks for, just
good point, Mel. Good process. Point. And actually on that, if you are starting on a new invoicing system, putting your business initials at the beginning of your invoice number. So for example, we invoice with PT 0001 as an example, just makes it a whole lot easier if you do have to chase something through. You can imagine how many invoice number 7 comes in to a particular plan manager. So you're just making it easy for people to follow your information through.
Lovely. And Justine, I'll invite you now to pop a link in the chat box for everyone. We do have a resource for providers that has some information, including a cheat sheet for getting paid faster. And we will also include a brand new resource on the replay for this webinar on the page. So if you're watching the webinar, it's in the links below, or you may already be in the articles. So have a read through that. Of course, if you've got any questions regards financial advice, please reach out to your accountant and seek independent financial advice regards to your circumstances. If you're sending through invoices to us, of course, feel free to reach out. Generally, our team will reach out if you're missing any of this information, and we'll also give you just those hints and tips along the way of, hey, next time if you do this, it'll be even faster for you. So we try to make the process fast for everyone, but they're our hot tips for really making sure the process is easy, because let's be honest, we're not all numbers people. I'm definitely not. And for a lot of us who aren't, it can feel a bit tedious doing the invoicing system. So let's make it easy. If it's a one-hit wonder, as I like to say, first time is the best time to get it right. So let's all work together on that. But Elisa, I want to move our topic along now to something else that's been a buzz in the community of late. And I know you've had a rather extensive conversation, I believe, with the team at DIA. So I'd like to invite your kind of opinions, feedback, if you like, on the discussion paper that was released in regards to support coordination recently.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. This has been a bit of a surprise discussion paper that was released to the community. So to participants, providers, anybody that would like to get feedback. So the NDIA is requesting feedback really around support coordination. So what is support coordination? You may not have it in your plan already or might not be familiar with it. Support coordination is a special budget within an NDIS plan where you can engage a support coordinator to help you to connect in with the providers and the services that you need to support your life. So they can be super helpful, especially as you're getting started and you're not sure where to head or where to find therapists or where to find supports, or even possibly what supports to choose. They can be very useful in that space. They can also be really helpful where if your life is very full, you may be a family with multiple people who are NDIS participants, or just lots going on in your world, and requesting support coordination can be a really big help. So at the moment, there's around 40% of NDIS participants have support coordination. And the NDIA is really wanting to raise a discussion and get feedback from the community about what's that experience of having a support coordinator. How valuable is it to you? So I guess why this is such an important conversation is that a lot of people, certainly we come across a number of people who call us with either first plan or having had plans where it's been difficult to use the funding just because you find providers are busy and you're sitting on wait lists, or you're not sure where to turn, or or need to just have a conversation with somebody in a lot more detail about how to actually use your plan and how to make your plan work. And that's really the role of support coordination. We are super passionate about support coordination. I think it's a hugely valuable part of the scheme. And to see it under, we would love to see it that everybody has the opportunity to access support coordination if they choose to. That would be fantastic. Because there are times where you just need a bit more help, or you just need to bounce ideas off somebody. And support coordinators are a great resource for that. So it was kind of disappointing to see that the way that the discussion paper came out had a lot of tables and information comparing the utilisation of plans. So what percentage of a plan is utilised or spent by the end of the plan, and comparing participants who had support coordination with participants who didn't have support coordination. And what the table suggested, and it was done in a variety of ways, so based on regions, based on age, for example, based on disability type as well. And what the paper was suggesting by the way that the tables were presented is that really there wasn't any difference. And so kind of the inferred meaning from that was a suggestion that perhaps therefore support coordination is not really adding any value, and we wouldn't miss it if it wasn't there. It was super frustrating to many in the support coordination world and in our community to see that information presented in that way. There are so many things that a support coordinator does that doesn't impact plan utilisation. So for example, what we found is although only 40% of participants have support coordination in their budgets, they're likely to be our most complex, our most at risk, our most in need of additional assistance participants. Having said that, I think everybody should have support coordination. So I don't think we should actually base it on perceived need, because your needs you may get actually extreme value out of it, of support coordinator, and not look on paper as if you have extreme needs. Having said that, it'd be interesting to note, and there's no information about this at all in the paper, what would have happened if support coordination wasn't in place? Potentially less of the plan would have been used. Potentially services might not have been able to be accessed or maintained. And so, really the paper is missing that key point. The other thing too is that sometimes support coordinators can help you to put in place things that actually mean you use less of your funding. So, a great example would be a support coordinator may help a person connect in with a local community group. So you might have a special interest. Let's use fishing, for example. You might be a keen fisher person. And so a support coordinator, part of their role is not just to help you engage with paid supports, but to help you find and connect into other supports as well. So if they help you find a fishing group, connect into there, you might find that you make a friend and that somebody is passing your way, able to pick you up to get to fishing or whatever, or drop you home, or those types of things. And in this case, you end up not actually using paid supports and not using as much of your plan. So to say that support coordination purely, the success of it should be purely considered against plan utilisation misses all of those super important benefits that support coordination gives. The benefit of connecting into your community, the benefit of not using paid supports, where that's, nothing wrong with using paid supports whatsoever, but just, pointing out that really plan utilisation should not be the only mechanism we use to to determine if support coordination is doing a good job and adding value. There's some interesting information in there as well around what type of qualifications should a support coordinator have. We talked a few weeks ago about the different levels of support coordination. And so with level 3 being the highest, that's our specialist support coordination, where there are qualifications required for registration under that category. And generally we find that category is only provided as an NDIA managed budget. So for people wanting to offer specialist support coordination, they would generally need to be registered to provide that. And then our other 2 levels of support coordination and support connection, I think it is for level 1. So with support coordination level 2, which is by far the most common type of support coordination funded in a budget. At the moment, there's no on paper qualification needed for a support coordinator, either level 1 or level 2. Personally, I think that's fantastic. And I think that's fantastic because what that means is that people with great lived experience, people who've actually done support coordination probably for many years for family members and loved ones, can find themselves a great role as a support coordinator, using all those incredible skills that have been developed to actually add value to other people. And I know many support coordination companies and organizations have a large number of their coordinators as people with lived experience. So it means you might not have gone to university, you might not have gone to TAFE, for example, or to tertiary education, but you have incredible value to add. The discussion paper is interesting in that it kind of raises the, should this be the case or should there be qualifications required? So on that, and this is again, it'd be great to put your personal feedback in on the paper and what your thoughts are around that. Having a look at, maybe there is some levels of training that would be useful, or accreditation type things that would be useful, but perhaps they're not best done by traditional tertiary education. We have a couple of great providers out there who provide support coordination training and really help people working in that field to think through some of the broader issues and bring just a higher level of thought process to the work that they're doing potentially. They would be Sam Pale with the Growing Space. She runs excellent support coordination training, and also disability DSC. I'm going, Mel. Disability Services Consulting. The team at DSC with Evie Nagel, they just do a fantastic job. So really good again. And lots of those courses, I believe, are also being available virtually. So if you are a support coordinator or it's an area you're looking to get into, definitely worth checking out. All right.
Definitely. I was going to say, we've got some questions around this that I'd like to go through. So thank you so much for sharing that. For anyone who isn't aware of it, you definitely can have your say. So Justine's popped a link up in the chat box for everyone, and we will include that on the replay page so that you can go and explore the discussion paper if you'd like to do that, and also have an opportunity to give some feedback there. So it's all about your personal experience, and without that feedback, it can be a bit disconnected as to how these discussion papers kind of look on paper, if you like, versus what's going on in the real world of implementation. So it'd be great for as many in the community to participate if you feel drawn to doing so. But Elisa, I'd love to ask you some questions around what's most important when we're thinking about choosing a support coordinator. So we'll get to how it's funding in a moment, but say I have funding for support coordination. What should I be looking for when I'm approaching potential support coordinators?
Good question, Mel. So when you're looking for a support coordinator, the sorts of things that we would suggest having a look at, you might be able to find somebody who has a speciality in your area. We're finding as a scheme continues to roll out and mature and develop, that many support coordinators who might have started out being a generalist, so knowing lots about lots of things and researching as they go. Support coordinators are generally good researchers. There's many people in that space who are now starting to specialize. So for example, they might be a specialist in acquired brain injury. That might be their thing. They really understand it. They've had a lot of participants and a lot of experience with acquired brain injury. They know a lot of the good contacts and the types of supports that if you're in that position, you might need to access. So going with a specialist, and when I say specialist, I don't necessarily mean that level 3 coordination we were talking about before, but somebody who's got a special area of focus for support coordination can be super useful. Looking for recommendations from other people. So who do you know in your world that has worked with that support coordinator? Can they recommend them? Have they had a good experience before? Support coordination it's one of our capacity building supports. So the goal of support coordination is that they will not just necessarily undertake the research and the actions for you, but also help you to know how to find to find the supports you need and help, for example, helping break down decisions into smaller, more easily identified steps towards an outcome. Depending on what level of support you're after will depend on what sort of level of support that support coordinator provides. So they might have worked with a friend of yours in one way, and for you may work with them in another way. And just depending on where you your needs are and your wants are on that spectrum, for want of a better word. They can also help you to understand what the consequences or practicalities of a particular option might be, and they're usually really good at providing you with different options. So you're not just presented with one option. Most support coordinators would present you with a range of options to think about. Other things, probably the most important for me would be rapport. Do you get on well? Can you have an honest conversation with them? Nothing worse than working with someone you don't like.
I was going to say, we're back to that communication piece. If you're someone who wants to talk on the phone and your support coordinator only wants to email, maybe not a great fit.
Or vice versa.
Yes, or vice versa, definitely. So always back down to that communication piece. And I think you definitely have touched on our next question there, which was, how does a support coordinator help me to build capacity? So we touched on definitely assisting participants to break down decisions into smaller, more easily identifiable components. What else do they do in terms of that capacity building, Elisa?
Some of it too, Mel, is helping you to understand your plan. At Plan Tracker, we do a thing we call a connect session. So if you're a new customer of ours, or if you're an existing customer and you just would like some help, or you get a new plan and you want to unpack it a bit more, we generally can spend about half an hour with you going through that. But that's not a lot of time. And so a support coordinator can actually take the time to really unpack your plan with you, help you to understand what it's about, help you to think about how you might use each of those budgets. So that's a super helpful thing.
Definitely is. And always good to note that it is always those individual circumstances. So having a support coordinator where, as Elisa kindly mentioned, we do a one-on-one connect session with you if you're part of if you're plan managing with Plan Tracker, but support coordinators are really also on that individual focus. So looking at your goals, looking at your plan funding and how you implement. And that's always really good to know. Now, another note on the communication side, and I realize for everyone, this can be an awkward conversation at the best of times, is what if I'm not happy with my support coordinator? So maybe they're just not helping me to find supports, they're not communicating well, or I just would like to use someone else. Can I change support coordinators midway through my plan?
The simple answer is yes. The NDIA and part of the scheme itself, if you like, is really about choice and control. So you can actually change providers for any of your providers that you're not happy with. Now, even if you've signed a service agreement with somebody, just check what that service agreement has actually signed you up for. But generally what we find is that, you might need to give a 2-week notice period, for example. in support coordination, they do have some reporting requirements that that the NDIA require. So even if you say, I'm finishing services with you, you might find that they still need to cover off a couple of hours of report writing to fulfill their obligations back to the agency. So generally, if you've got a service agreement, you could check that for details. But yes, if it's not working, change it. You know, let your support coordinator know it's not working. They may have another support coordinator within their organisation that might be a better fit for you, or you might have to look for a different organisation or individual.
Fantastic. Now, looping back to our earlier conversation there, support coordination, obviously it is funded. How exactly is it funded under my plan?
So at the moment, there's a couple of ways. The first one, which is the regular way, if you like, is through a particular budget called support coordination, and the NDIA. If they, it's not an automatic. Unlike plan management, if you request plan management under legislation, you will receive plan management. Support coordination is not the same. They do a reasonable and necessary assessment on it. The planner does, and so you know, when you go to request it, make sure you have some good reasons why you're requesting, and some good backup as to what you're wanting there. But under the support coordination budget would be the regular place to claim from. At the moment, thanks to COVID, there's also the opportunity to claim from core. So there's some temporary item codes for support coordination in core which can be used.
Fantastic. And there is some ruling around whether you can use core straight off the bat, or as the agency has kindly advised on the NDIS website, you do have to check with your LAC. And if your LAC does not have capacity to support you, then you may access your core funding to do so. Is that correct, Elisa?
That's it. So quick call to your LAC. I think the concept is that the LACs should be able to pick up the slack for you. We know in reality that's not often the case. So yeah, tick the box by giving them a call, and then hopefully get on with using your core and the support that you need.
Lovely. All right. And the last topic or idea I'd like to talk about under this topic is we've been hearing a lot lately about psychosocial recovery coaches, or I've shortened it to psychosocial coaches because I keep getting tongue twisted every time we do one of these webinars. So that's my abbreviation for the long one. What is the difference between a psychosocial recovery coach and a support coordinator, and can I be funded for both?
The answer to the last part of your question is no, you can't be funded for both. The agency's been very clear about this. They will fund one or the other. Interesting for those that follow along on these kinds of things, the price for psychosocial recovery coaches is actually considerably lower than it is for level 2 support coordination. It's around about the $70 mark. Now, that figure wasn't just plucked from the air. It apparently is a figure that's used in other government schemes where this type of psychosocial coaches or coaching is available. And so it's a standard industry price elsewhere. Which is what is making quite a few support coordinators a little nervous at the moment, and rightly so. Because there's a bit of a suggestion in the paper that we've just discussed that in fact support coordination should be funded at that same rate. We know that would be a terrible thing, because it would mean that some of that really high quality work that we see done by support coordinators would possibly not be able to be done. The two roles are actually very different. Support coordinator, we've covered off on what they do. The coach, let's just go with the coach. The coaches, you do need to have a level of qualification or experience. So I believe off the top of my head, it's about 2 years worth of mental health in the community experience, or mental health training through a tertiary qualification. They're really there to help coach and to help recovery through crisis situations. So, and again, it's only for really people on the scheme with psychosocial requirements, as opposed to people across the scheme with a wide variety of needs.
Lovely. And I think it's always good to recap there. I know I've definitely seen on LinkedIn as a platform, there's been some roles popping up where we've got support coordinators who are also qualifying to offer the psychosocial, because the community at large has been asking, if I got funding for a psychosocial recovery coach, how can I find one? Because there's not a lot of providers that are kind of readily available, has been the feedback in market. Have you heard differently, Elisa?
No, and we welcome any provider who's offering in that space to reach out and let us know. Not that we've seen it come through in many plans. I think really very, very, very small number at this point, as you'd expect with anything new.
Yeah, I was going to say it is new, so we may see it more, we may not. That's kind of a watch this space, but definitely if you are offering psychosocial recovery coaching, the team at Plan Tracker would love to hear from you, so we can pop you on our database so that when we have those instances, and we always refer to a few options, so the participant always remains in control of their choice as to which provider they're choosing to go with. And as we always say, Lisa, we advocate for communication. So having that conversation with the provider that you're considering, whether they're a support coordination provider or any other, is always paramount to getting started and making the choice that works best and fits your situation best. So you mentioned before service agreements. So that's where I'd like for us to move on to now, if you don't mind. We've got if I can get the slide to agree with me. There we go. So service agreements is something that comes up in conversations quite a lot, especially in all of our Facebook communities online. So there's lots of conversations around this of what on earth are they? When do I need one? Why do I need one? So I thought, let's go back to basics, if you don't mind, and let's talk about what is a service agreement.
Okay. So the understanding of it is really in the name. It's an agreement between yourself as a participant and your provider. So it's an agreement to basically allocate a certain amount of funding in return for a certain amount and type of support. Simple and easy. Now, the first thing that we should note is that service agreements are not mandatory. So the NDIA highly recommend, but not mandatory. So you can absolutely engage with a service provider without one, including if your funds are NDIA managed and the provider is claiming directly from the agency through the portal. Even then, you'll find that they're not mandatory, but they are good practice.
I was going to say, can I put an asterisk?
You can put an asterisk.
Plan management. Do you need a service agreement to sign up with a plan manager?
No, you actually don't. It's still not mandatory. However, they're very good practice. And I think anything where you're allowing somebody to access your funding on your behalf, certainly for us, we're pretty keen to make sure we have the right people and the right sign off on those things before we move forward.
Lovely. And I know there's always this confusion in this space. It's like, if they're a registered provider, they have to have one. Their best practice is definitely the direction. Now, if my provider doesn't offer me a service agreement up front, can I ask for one or make my own and ask them to sign it?
Well, you could, but let's talk about really what's the purpose of it. So the purpose of it is, if you are a provider, it's a good way of making sure that both parties are aware and have clear expectations about what's going to be delivered and for how much and for how long. So say, for example, if you're we'll go back to our favorite speech therapists. All right, so if you're a speechy, then having a service agreement with your participant or with your participant's nominee helps, because you can actually outline things like what our cancellation policy is. If somebody's sick or unable to make it, what is your cancellation policy? And you need, obviously, with it being NDIS funding, to keep in line with NDIS rules, but still good to point those out in there. It also allows you to agree with the participant about how much funding will they allocate from their plan. They don't necessarily have to tell you how much funding they have in that budget. You don't really need to know that. You just need to know, if you're our provider, that how much you have agreed with that participant. And then if the person is plan managing, make sure that a copy of the service agreement is sent to the plan manager so that they can, we're not allowed to use that quarantine word anymore, Mel.
No,
We're
I've
all having to
banned that
change
in the
it.
plan tracker team.
Quarantine is
No
banned.
quarantine.
So your plan manager can allocate your funding and make sure that that is set aside for your invoices when they come in. Now, the other key thing with a service agreement is generally you should have it run for the duration of the plan or for a component of the plan. So it's not uncommon. We see quite often where, let's say somebody's right near the end of their plan, they've only got a certain amount of funding left in, say, CB Daily Living. So that's our improved daily living, that's our therapy budget, only a small amount left. You might want to sign a service agreement to make sure of that small amount left, they're going to allocate $2,000 to you. For example. So you just date it for the date that that service will start and the date that it will end, provided you're within the plan dates, because that's when that funding is available. The other thing that's really important in a service agreement is to realize that things change. You can start with the best intentions, but needs might change, circumstances might change throughout the year. So it's important to have basically a cancellation clause, a clause that clearly says how to cancel or amend the service agreement. Now, if you took a service agreement to the NDIA, they're not necessarily going to do anything with that if you're a provider. So really, it's a separate commercial agreement that you've got between yourself as a provider and a participant. But they are commercial terms. So making sure you've got a clear cancellation policy is a really great idea. It also means that and again, you can't lock people into a 6-month cancellation. That just doesn't work. So, let's be sensible about it. Can you make your own? So it's a good question. So if you're a participant and you want to make your own service agreement, you'll probably find that providers who have been operating for a while may already have their own service agreement, or may choose not to use one and just choose to, these are our general business terms, and engage with us on an ad hoc basis on those. If you've got a service provider who doesn't have a service agreement already, then you could, by all means, again, communication, take some suggestions to them as to what you would like in there. And it might be a situation where you have an independent contractor that you just want to put in. You just want to, it's always easier to get those expectations right in the beginning. What will happen if? And popping that down on paper just means there isn't as confusion later. So yes, you certainly could do that. But again, they are legal documents, but I think depending on the service agreement, you may have trouble, holding that up in a local court, for example. So you've got to think about what is the purpose, what's the heart behind it, and really it's about setting expectations. And if you are a provider, making sure that the participant is committing to allocate those funds to the services they've agreed.
Great. And I feel like you're a mind reader some days. It wasn't on the notes, but I was thinking about that independent contractor kind of position. So I love that example.
Well, I think we come across that one a lot, Mel.
We definitely do. You mentioned this when we were talking about support coordinators just before as well. Something else that you'll often see in a service agreement can also be not only say service hours, so you're agreeing to X amount of sessions at this rate, you can also include that report writing section as well. So if your service provider is required to write reports as part of their service delivery, having the I'm going to spend 4 additional hours at the end of your plan to write this report with plan review, knowing those costs up front, super helpful. Would you agree, Elise?
Yeah, I would. That's right. And we generally recommend to people that if you are using, say, therapists, for example, you generally don't need reports for an NDIS review for core in general. But you do for anything from the improved whatever. So all our capacity building budgets. So especially your therapy, psychology out of improved relationships, maybe something out of your health and well-being if you've used an exercise physiologist. And those are the reports that the NDIA will request, and the NDIA will fund through your funding. We generally find, and again, every situation is different, but talk to your provider up front about that. Most reports come in at somewhere between 1 and 2 hours. Some can come in a little higher depending on the workload. So just have a conversation up front, but always good to just have in the back of your mind. Make sure you leave some in the budget for the about 6 weeks out from the end of your plan.
Fantastic. All right. I'm just going to pop our contact details up for just a second there. We've got a community question, and we're going to jump back a topic at the moment to something I know you really probably don't want to talk about again, but social recovery coaches, because it's
that's all right. I thought you were going to say travel.
No, I spared you. I promised you a webinar with no transport and travel, and we have
now
delivered.
I've mentioned it.
You have mentioned it.
We did even quiz our team on this the other day because they really have made it complicated. So yeah, but they did well. They nailed their Kahoot, so it was good.
Absolutely love. We should do another Kahoot live session on a webinar sometime soon. I think that'd be fun for everyone.
That would be fun.
Now, on this topic that's not transport, Joanne, and thank you, Joanne, for reaching out with this question, has asked, what's the difference between a psychosocial recovery coach and a psychologist? Which I think is actually a really great question because they're kind of similar sounding in a way, but what's the kind of difference? So we looked at a psychosocial recovery coach's role just before. How does that compare to a psychologist?
So the difference is about $140 an hour.
I knew you were going to go with numbers.
You can tell. Plan manager. What can I say? No. So a psychologist, generally, people would access a psychologist, on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis, depending on need. More often, less often. But you go to a psychologist for therapy. So they are usually providing some form of therapy, CBT, behavioral therapy, any other type of therapy you can think of right now that I can't think of. But they generally provide therapy. So whereas a recovery coach is someone who walks much more alongside you, you're probably more likely to meet them in home than you are, say, a therapist, where you're more likely, again, we know therapists do home visits, and for which we're very grateful, but you're more likely to meet a recovery coach out in the community somewhere, maybe, or within a home setting, or there's someone who'll come alongside a lot more, rather than going for a therapy session as such. There's actually a really good, I'm not sure, Justine, if you've got the link somewhere, but there's a document that the NDIA have popped on their website about psychosocial recovery coaches, which actually outlines, it's quite a good document where it outlines kind of the scope of what's expected from this space. So being a new space, we have yet to see what it exactly looks like outworked in the community, but there's some good hints and tips in there for, some basic goal setting and some coaching and encouragement to reach some of those basic goals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for clarifying those. And Joanne, I really hope that does answer your question. Thank you so much for asking. Elisa, we do have one final question, which we get a lot, and I'll give you the example of this question, but it applies to a lot of different services. So can I access or engage a support coordinator virtually without actually having to meet them face to face?
Actually, that's a great question, Mel. We have a number of customers who just haven't been able to find the right support coordinator in their area, their physical area, who have engaged with some other support coordinators that we know really well, working great in other states even. I know, for example, I was speaking to someone the other day, and they're based in Melbourne, and they're providing support coordination services for somebody up in Queensland, and it's working really well. We have the same with people who are living remotely and very remote. I know we've got customers in very remote parts of New South Wales and South Australia, for example, who are using support coordinators out of South Australia, who may never visit locally, but they're able to do a lot of that legwork that you need done. So yeah, absolutely. virtual can be a good way to go, whether you're based in a city or a remote, very remote area.
Definitely. Thank you for clarifying that. I thought it was super valuable for us to end on that conversation. I know we have it a lot in the plan management space of, does my plan manager need to be in my town or in my state? And the answer is absolutely not. A plan manager can be anywhere in the country. It's finding the right fit for your circumstances. So, for example, Plan Tracker, we're national. We do have team in other states as well. So we support you and meet you where you're at. And it's all about having those open communication channels and finding what works best for you. So if that's chat, phone, email, video conversations even, we like to offer it all so that we are available in whatever medium or platform you'd like to engage with our team. So Elisa, I just want to say a huge thank you on behalf of the community for going through what for some of that was a lot of basics as well as a lot of these changes. It's hugely valuable for everyone, myself included. I always learn things, even though I prepare the slides. I'm always learning something listening to you. So thank you so much. Was there anything you'd like to leave the community with today?
Yeah, I guess my big encouragement would be, as a community, this is our opportunity to give some feedback to the agency on the huge value of support coordinators. So if you've got a story to tell, please jump online and tell your story. Every story counts. It really makes a big difference, the type of feedback that comes through. And it's very hard to argue with real life personal examples. Might not look like something in a graph, but actually that personal experience, that personal story is incredibly valuable and powerful. And that's just not if you are a participant, that's also if you're a support coordinator. Please feedback some of those stories. Feedback what it's like actually working in this space and some of the great outcomes that you've had. The agency, and just on this final note, the agency was due to release some guidance around support coordination a couple of years ago, and they have stalled and stalled and stalled. And in fact, what's happened in that time frame is that the community has moved on. The sector has moved on, and what's being provided in support coordination now is amazing and really impactful on people's lives. And I think it's super important that we as a community tell that story and tell it strongly, because I certainly want to see support coordination actually become even stronger in people's plans.
I could absolutely not agree more with you there, Elisa. So we will include that link on the replay page for everyone. So if you're watching the replay, you'll find that link below where you can go and view the discussion paper and give your feedback, share your story. That's what it's all about. Your stories are really helping to found the future as a community of what the NDIS looks like. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all for your time. We hope you found value in today's NDIS Cuppa question session. As always, if you're looking for a plan manager or you'd like to chat with the team at Plan Tracker, you can reach us on phone 1-800-549-670 or email hello@plantracker.com.au. Until next time, Elisa, just want to say on behalf of us both, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you on another webinar session sometime soon. All right, thank you everyone.
Thanks.